Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep today into, well, one of the most foundational moments in history, the American founding of 1776.
Right. And we all know the usual story, the muskets, the declarations, the fight for independence.
But our sources argue that 1776 was something much, much bigger. They actually call it a singularity.
A singularity, yeah. A moment that didn't just change politics, it fundamentally inverted millennia of legal and political tradition. We're going to look at the legal architecture, specifically through the lens of trust law.
And that's the core of our deep dive today. The sources contend the entire American system was designed for the people to be the masters, the ultimate owner.
Through grantors and beneficiaries, and the government. The government was set up to be the servant, the trustee.
So our mission here is to trace how the founders pulled off that, astonishing inversion. We'll look at powerful legal concepts they use, things like elodium and ultravirus, to lock it all in place.
And then we have to examine the paradox of modern life, which the sources call a fundamental betrayal of that original design.
Right. And this is critical for you, the listener, especially if you've ever felt that disconnect from government, that sense of powerlessness. What you might be feeling is what the sources call a jurisdictional paradox. It's the servant dictating terms to the master. And understanding the original instruction manual, well, that's the only way to see the misalignment.
It's a huge shift in thinking, so we really have to start where the sources do, which is understanding the sheer weight of the past.
Let's start there. The king's shadow. For thousands of years, there was one truth about authority. It was always top-down.
Always. I mean, you look at any civilization, pharaohs, emperors, right up to the 18th century, and power is a river flowing downhill.
From the top.
From the very top. God or the heavens appoint the king, and the king rules the people. That was the cosmic architecture.
And the sources really hammer this point home.
Yeah.
The divine right of kings wasn't just, a political slogan.
No, it was a spiritual and legal axiom. To break the king's law, that was treason, an earthly crime. But to defy the king himself,
That was something else entirely.
it was blasphemy. You weren't just opposing a man in a crown, you were challenging the divine order of the cosmos. The penalty was death. And in that worldview, it made perfect sense. You were threatening creation itself.
And that axiom defined everything about you as an individual.
Completely. Your identity was assigned, your destiny was fixed by birth, and, crucially, you didn't possess inherent rights.
You had privileges.
Exactly. Privileges granted by the ruler's grace. The king might give you a charter for a business or permission to own land, but it was always a revocable gift.
Which means if the king needed your land back, or if you said something inconvenient and he wanted to silence you, he wasn't violating your rights.
He was just revoking a privilege he'd granted. That's the key distinction. In that world, the idea of we the people being the source of authority
The ones doing the granting.
wasn't just radical. It was an existential threat to every government on earth. Laws were just extensions of the king's will. The king was the law.
So even something like the Magna Carta wasn't a real reversal of that structure.
No, not at all. The Magna Carta was a hard-won concession. It was bloody. It was extracted from a king who needed something. It put a crack in the edifice, sure, but it didn't flip the structure. The power still started with the king.
Okay, so now we get to the singularity. You have 3,000 years of this top-down history, this immense pressure, and then 1776 happens.
And it wasn't a slow burn. It was a sharp, decisive fracture.
The defiance started small, though, right? Over things like the Stamp Act, taxes on tea.
Initially, yes. They were acting as Englishmen, protesting what they saw as abuses of their rights. But their pleas for redress, they just fell on completely deaf ears.
Which forced them into this impossible question.
Right. Are we just subjects of a distant king, or are we something
Yeah.
more?
And their answer in the Declaration of Independence is just mind-blowing when you consider the tradition they were rejecting.
It's the ultimate mic drop, that line. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed.
A complete break.
It snaps the cord. That millennia-old chain of command is just gone. The power flow is utterly reversed.
Instead of God to king to people,
Of
it's...
God to man to government?
And this leads us to what the sources call elodium's hour. This feels like a really critical concept.
It's maybe the most critical concept for understanding American sovereignty. Think about that moment, that political vacuum. The king's authority is dissolved, but the new government isn't formed yet. What happens then?
It must have been, well, terrifying. Chaos, but also total freedom.
Absolute chaos and absolute freedom. For that moment, the people stood as absolute sovereigns. The term is elodium.
Which means
What? exactly. It means absolute unencumbered ownership. They didn't just own their land, they owned themselves, their rights, their property, with no superior lord or king above them.
Okay, but how is that different from me owning my house today? I feel like I own my house.
Well, when you own your house today, legally, you own it in what's called fee simple. It means you own it, but subject to the paramount sovereignty of the state.
So property taxes, eminent domain.
Exactly. True elodium means ownership without any superior entity claiming a higher title or the right to tax it or take it outside of, say, common defense.
Wow. So their rights were suddenly transformed. They went from being revocable privileges to inherent endowments that they absolutely own.
And that's the moment. That is the moment they gained the capacity to be grantors. They owned everything. The entire political system was theirs to give away or to keep.
So if the people are the grantors holding all this power, the next great challenge is, how do you build a government?
A government strong enough to work, but not so strong that it becomes the new tyrant.
And the solution they found was, well, it was genius. It wasn't a normal contract.
No, because that would imply two equal parties. This was a very specific, ancient legal arrangement. A trust. A government based on a trust lets you delegate authority without surrendering your ultimate sovereignty.
So the Constitution isn't a social contract. It's a trust indenture. It's the rule book written by the masters for their servants.
That's the framework. And the roles are crystal clear.
Let's define them.
Okay. The grantors and beneficiaries are we the people, the sovereign owners. They create the trust, and they are the ones who benefit from it.
They're trustees.
Those are the government officials, president, Congress, judges. And they are legally bound to serve the beneficiaries.
And that legal status, being a trustee, it comes with really strict rules, right?
It imposes what's called a fiduciary duty. This is the highest duty in law. It demands absolute loyalty, prudence, no self-dealing. A trustee cannot profit at the expense of the beneficiary. They are servants, period.
That makes perfect sense. So what was the asset? What did we, the people, the grantors, actually put into this trust?
That's the key. They didn't put in everything. They held back their most sacred assets.
Their lives, their rights, their property held in elodium.
Exactly. Those remained unalienable, held directly from God. What they delegated was only a very specific, carefully defined slice of their collective political power.
Can you give an example of that? What kind of power?
Sure, just look at Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. They delegated the power to coin money, to establish post offices, to raise armies.
Things an individual can't really do on their own.
Right, functional powers. They pooled these specific powers and handed them to the trustee, the federal government, to manage for everyone's benefit.
So when we talk about limited government, it's not just a philosophy. It's a hard legal boundary.
It's a strict legal boundary. The government is only allowed to do what's on that list. Anything else is a trespass on the rights of the people.
It's more than a trespass, isn't it? It's a violation of that fiduciary duty.
And it can be legally remedied. The Constitution, the indenture, lists what the trustees can do and what they can't.
But even with that tight structure, people were still skeptical.
Deeply skeptical. They just fought a war over this stuff. That's what led to the demand for the Bill of Rights.
And the source is clear. This wasn't an afterthought.
No, it was a condition precedent. States like Virginia and New York basically said, we're not signing this indenture until you add explicit, non-negotiable lines that the trustees can never cross.
So it's not a list of privileges the government is giving us.
No, it's the old paradigm flipped on its head. The Bill of Rights is a list of explicit prohibitions placed upon the government.
Fences for the fiduciary.
Perfect way to put it. The First Amendment isn't Congress giving you free speech. It's a command. Congress shall make no law. The Second Amendment isn't the state granting a right to bear arms. It's a prohibition. Shall not be infringed.
So what happens if the trustee, the government, steps over one of those stances? What's the ultimate legal kill switch?
This brings us to the ultimate safeguard, and one that is rarely taught today, the legal concept of ultravirus.
Ultravirus, Latin for beyond the powers. Tell us why that's so important here.
It's the ironclad rule for any trust. If a trustee acts outside the explicit powers given to them in the trust indenture, that action is legally ultravirus.
And the consequence of an act being ultravirus is what?
The consequence is that the action is legally void and unenforceable. It has no legal weight. It's not just unconstitutional as an idea. It has no actual authority because we, the people, never granted that power to begin with.
So if a trustee uses trust funds to buy a yacht, when the document says the money is for education,
that purchase is void. Same principle.
that is just a radical level of clarity. So if Congress passes a law that isn't on its list of powers, that act is a breach of trust, and it's void from the start.
It should be an immediate check on power. The grantor sets the rules, the trustee has to follow them. But somewhere, that clarity got lost, and that's where the sources talk about the great betrayal.
So how does a system that's so tightly constructed even begin to break down? How does the servant start acting like the master?
It was a slow decay. The trustees stopped acting like fiduciaries and started acting like they were the source of power. Inherent rights got redefined as state-granted privileges that could be regulated or taxed or taken away.
And how did they achieve that, practically? The sources talk about a really subtle legal trick involving the corporate veil. Let's try to make that accessible.
Okay, so the government realized it couldn't directly boss around the sovereign natural person, the grantor. That person's rights are unalienable.
So they needed a different legal target.
Exactly. They maneuvered the sovereign person into adopting a different legal identity, the corporate person.
And this is related to why my name sometimes shows up in all caps on government documents, right?
Yeah.
Looking like a business name.
That's precisely it. The all-caps name, or linking you to different statutory frameworks. It often signifies a legal fiction, a commercial entity created by the state for the purpose of being regulated.
So the sovereign person is a creature of God, but the corporate person is a creation of the state.
A creation of legislative fiat. And by getting licenses, filing certain tax forms, you're transacting with them not as the sovereign grantor.
But under this corporate person status, it's like putting on a different legal hat.
It's an excellent analogy. And when you wear that corporate person hat, you're agreeing to a new jurisdiction. You're subtly stripped of your sovereign standing and reclassified as, say, a state franchisee. And a franchisee has to play by the franchisor's rules.
Which means the government can bypass the Constitution, the original trust indenture, when dealing with this corporate person. They could just apply statutes and regulations instead.
And here's the switch. The corporate person, by its nature, becomes a debtor. It's subject to fees, compliance, statutes. The natural man holds elodium unencumbered. The corporate person is suddenly entangled.
So that's how the modern government asserts so much power. Not over the sovereign grantor, but over this legal fiction it helped create.
It's the ultimate jurisdictional trick. And that brings us right back to that feeling of disconnect you mentioned at the start. The servant is dictating terms to the master, but only because the master has forgotten who they are and put on a different costume.
The illusion is powerful, because the paperwork and the fines feel very real.
Oh, they do. But the original structure is still the truth. The U.S. system was built on the absolute superiority of the individual, the grantor, and the subservience of the government, the trustee.
So the solution isn't about, physical revolution. It's an intellectual one, a reawakening of that sovereign self.
Exactly. It's an act of intellectual disentanglement. It means understanding that when you deal with government, you have to consciously assert your identity as the grantor, the beneficiary. You have to demand your trustees follow the original indenture.
This has been an absolutely fascinating dive.
Yeah.
It transforms 1776 from just a date in a history book into a living legal blueprint for sovereignty.
It really does clarify everything, from the structure of power to why you feel that sense of friction when you deal with bureaucracy.
Okay, so let's leave our listener with this, a final provocative thought that builds on everything we've uncovered. If recognizing your identity as a sovereign grantor instead of a legal corporate person reveals that many acts of government over your life are fundamentally ultravirus and void beyond the legitimate powers granted by the Constitution, what immediate conscious responsibility does this knowledge place upon you to hold your trustees accountable?
Yeah, hear me now. All of Babylon look disaster. Politician more full, but them heart empty. Tipsy, tipsy, tipsy. Them politicians, them gone crazy. Drunk off the wine of greed and vanity. Sell out the people for a little currency.